Yeah, so I've got. Oh, just get rid of the transcription because that is very distracting, the transcription, because you think I never said that. So group one, and that was, I'm going to mention the first person who comes on the list, which is Lisa Kendall. Not necessarily saying, Lisa, you have to be the person who feeds back. I'm just wondering whether there was any ideas from group one that they want to share with us. So Lisa's group, in other words.
Yeah, well, we didn't actually discuss who was going to feed back. So if any other members of the group want to say anything, please shout if you can. But I think it was quite interesting as we watched the text start to drop in that we were all clearly having very similar conversations about reward and incentivization and how you actually recognize the work of students. And I think that we wanted to make the point that, yes, it's appropriate to pay students in certain circumstances, especially if they're effectively acting as consultants. So they're providing input to initiative, a project or an activity that's likely to influence not their own outcomes, but the outcomes for students coming after them or something like that. But it's quite important to distinguish that, especially the issue about the power dynamic, when it's likely to be the co-creation piece, for example, within a module, where you're encouraging students at the outset to talk about how you're going to do the assessment together, what kind of things you're going to explore, especially if it's one of these challenge-led courses where you want to identify a particular topic for discussion, and the different types of assessment approaches, whether they be blogs and products and things like that. So using credit or recognizing that actually the reward is part of their participation and their own outcomes from the project. So I think it's quite interesting. A lot of the comments are about that, and then about closing the feedback loop as well. I see there are a few points about that, making sure that when students are engaged, you are proactively telling them what impact their engagement has had, how it's changed things, or how it's influenced a new policy or driving institutional change forward. And I think the only other thing I was going to talk about was the issue of targeting students. The first two presentations were quite interesting because they were talking about students who do not feel like they belong, who feel isolated, who don't typically engage when you put out an advert for, we want students to come and talk to us. Got two major projects ongoing in my institution right now, one on student support and one on curriculum transformation. And they're often self-selecting, very confident, very articulate individuals who are thoroughly excited and willing to engage. And actually, more often than not, what you want is to reach and talk to and engage with those students who don't. So we were talking about what are the ways in which you can do that for particular projects, targeting certain, but even encouraging students who maybe have some of their own ideas to try and find like-minded staff that they can join up with. So a project for Black Girls at Leeds, identifying lecturers who would help them with visibility projects and things like that. So for me, that's the particular thing I'd like to hear a lot more about. How do you actually engage with those students who do not typically engage, who do not feel like they belong, who do not feel like they're part of it? Because they're often the ones that you really want to do something transformative with and really want to transform their experiences.
Thanks, Lisa. So while we've got people on the course, has anyone got any ideas about how we can reach the hard to reach, for want of a better term? I mean, obviously, Helena, that was, a big emphasis on the work you were doing, and Kerry, part-time students sadly are often excluded or feel excluded within institutions. But I'm wondering whether anyone else has got any ideas about how we get the, I don't like the term usual suspects, I think that can come across as quite disparaging, but how we move beyond the more typically engaged students to engage with students who perhaps don't feel that they have a right or a right to engage or to be heard. So I don't know whether anyone's got any views on that they'd like to add in.
I think it's dangerous sometimes to try and put students in groups that you want to identify with, because I think, as someone said earlier, if you're trying to target mature students, they may not identify as a mature student, so you're not in that you'll see that you're asking for feedback from mature students, and they won't think it's for them, so they won't come forward. Because I can't remember who it was who spoke first.
Kerry.
Kerry. So what did you say? Your institution's definition of a mature student was from age 21 upwards. I mean, I don't think a 21-year-old student would volunteer to take part in some discussions about being a mature student. I think a 40-year-old student would. Someone who has been out of education for a period of time, I would say. But
I don't think the 21-year-olds like that label.
No.
And it's not a label that they've chosen for themselves. It's a label that the university has given them.
Yeah. Sarah, I can see you've put your
Not
hand.
an idea, sorry. Another problem.
No,
okay, thanks, Amy.
I was just going to respond to that. I wonder if then we'd have a look at the language we're using when we're trying to reach out and engage students. So rather than saying, you know, we've got, you know, a project for mature students, we could try and use more descriptive factors, you know, like are you 25 to 30, you know, do you have this experience? Then we want to hear from you. Or yeah, that's not a very good example, but you know what I'm trying to say there. So rather than using the terms that people might find off-putting, try and change the language a bit.
Yeah, to be a bit more descriptive. As Amanda's pointed out, HESE use that as their data collection point. But I suppose just because HESE use it doesn't mean institutions would have to, which I don't think is the point you're making, is it, Amanda? So one of the things I think is interesting in that as well is intersectionality and how that plays out. And you know, I think very often when we're looking at target groups of students, we ignore the fact that those students will sit in and identify with lots of different target groups, and they can sometimes have quite oppositional effects on the extent to which they may feel included or excluded. So so I think that's something else to take into account. But thanks for that, Lisa. In terms of, oh sorry, Helena, your hand's up.
I think Wendy's hand was up before mine, and mine's turning into a bit of a legacy hand, so I'm happy for it.
All right then, Wendy.
Hi, I was just reading Hannah's post actually, which is full enough linked to what I was about to say. So she said about help engagement, varying who is asking the questions. Maybe that's where we work with the super engaged. They can help to engage the quieter voices. And a few years ago, we wrote our staff student partnership agreement, and we wanted the quieter voices. We didn't want the CSU, we didn't want all the SIRs and, you know, all the popular ones and ones that are perhaps doing well. So we did a Let's Talk About You event with free pizza. And we got loads and loads of students there who would not have heard from otherwise. And they were led by the engaged SEOs, the SERs, the Students' Union. So it was a collaboration, and they just talked about their experiences. There was no real agenda because it didn't matter who or what group they fell into. And we made a lot of progress in an hour or so and found things out that we wouldn't have heard from the CSU. And then a lot of them then decided, well, maybe I could do a bit more of this. So it's a bit softly, isn't it, to start with, perhaps?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thanks for that. So group 2, I've got here Jamie as the first name I've seen on my list. I don't know whether there was anything from group 2 that you wanted to sort of highlight that could be a bit of a provocation for some discussion.
We spoke about quite a lot and then realized we hadn't answered the questions, but they kind of fed into the questions anyway. So we kind of spoke about when running projects being reliant on things like sabbatical officers, which engagement can kind of change from year to year, which can either be great or can be more of a challenge. And similarly, like kind of having single groups or specific people isn't necessarily the best thing maybe on running projects. And we also had a discussion around kind of like paying students for their input and the pros and cons of both sides, where some people may say paying student reps or similar may get people who are only in it for the money. But on the flip side, you may be missing a group of students who need the money and would prioritize part-time work over engaging. So that kind of balance and kind of what's right and what's wrong. And then I think we got pulled back into this. I can't remember if we covered anything else. So anybody else in the group, you can.
I'm sure if someone else from group 2 wants to chip in, and if anyone else has got any comments in relation to that. But you know, I think Lisa raised that issue of payment and different forms of payment as well through accreditation, or linking through to academic credit. But I'm just wondering, because that's come up a few times, whether the notion of payment is something that anyone has a particular position on or views on. Kerry, I can see you put pay is good, but the contract isn't significant, so it's perhaps not going to be the big deal breaker.
I think if we want to engage people other than the exceptionally willing students who can afford to give up their time, I think we have to think about how we pay people. And I also think it's about power as well, and balance, because we're paid for our roles when we are engaged in these. So if we want to have a true partnership, why would one group of people be paid for their work and the other group not?
I mean, I often think that when I sit in meetings, which are turgid beyond belief, aren't they? Let's face it. You know, start off a meeting when people talk about the minutes and the action point control register, and you think, well, that's it. You know, half of us have already lost the will to live, but half of us are paid quite well to lose the will to live in meetings. And then you sit with students and you think, why on earth would they sit through all this? You know, so I think there's something around, if we're not gonna reward people for doing the jobs that we do, then why do we have to use the same tired old ways of acting? You know, the whole notion of a meeting, I'm not a big fan of meetings anyway. Anyone who's sat with me in a meeting will know it doesn't take that long to work it out. But I think for me, you know, we use the same rituals as a meeting. We create these really quite difficult spaces where there are all the conventions of minutes and, you know, the way people interact in meetings, and we create these very unrealistic spaces, and then we invite students into them and wonder why they often look a bit bewildered or confused or bored or a bit scared, and they don't necessarily want to be in that space. So why don't we make that meeting something that is perhaps more of a workshop, or more opportunity for them to talk, you know, not necessarily saying what's wrong with the course, and I'm going to be the person who teaches the course asking you what's wrong with the course, which is a great example of that. Jackie, your hand's up. Thank you.
I think Claire was there before me, actually.
I'm rubbish at this, aren't I, Jackie? Yeah, Claire, your hand's up. Go on,
well,
sorry
I'll
about that.
make it quick so Jackie gets her say as well in that case. I'm just thinking about what you were saying about the turgid meetings, and this is an aspiration rather than a solution, I think, but we are working so hard with our students to try to get them to really embrace projects for themselves. So for instance, our student experience budget, would you believe at the end of every year there's money left over? We need the students to drive the project rather than waiting for the staff to have the inspiration and to lead the project. So we're trying to turn things round. This is something that we're working really hard on, and we will carry on working hard on, no doubt, for a very long time. But one of the things I think we've got to make a conscious effort to do is change the language that we use. So it's not just about these really long meetings. It's about that sort of transactional relationship we have with our students. When we say things like, you said, we did, we're just sort of reinforcing, you've paid the fees, so we're going to run around and make things right for you. We want the students to sort of feel empowered about how they engage and what their university experience is going to be like.
Okay, so thanks for that, Claire. And Jackie?
I want to pick up on the sort of transactional nature of paying students, and I think it's a really difficult one, because we had an example in our discussion where it wouldn't be something that we would consider paying students for, because it was a normal feedback, students being involved and feeding back on how a programme had run and helping the programme leader to reflect on that and then to improve on the programme. And it might have only been about 2 or 3 hours of their time, but it's something we would never consider paying for. So there's certain things we ask students to engage with that we don't pay them for. And then if we call it a project and we give it 20 hours, then we do pay for it. And I think it sort of undervalues those that can give some time, that want to engage in sort of small scale feedback or initiatives to give some feedback on course changes. But because we don't pay for it, that then we do it on other things. And I think we're getting ourselves a little bit confused about the transactional nature. And then I think there's elements about citizenship as well. But we have to recognise that students haven't got free time, or a number of them haven't. And so I quite like this idea of the credit bearing element. So that is equal for all students. They can all engage in it. They have to give up that time. And it could mean that we recognise all levels of partnership working as opposed to only those which are classed as a project.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you. Thanks for that, Jackie. In terms of other groups, we are sort of running out of time a little bit, but looking at group 4, Hannah, I'm wondering whether you've got any comments from your group that you want to raise. Go back to it. I've realised I've missed out group 3. I'll come back to you in a minute as well. But Hannah, as I've mentioned your name, sorry for picking on you. It's just the first person on my list. Jackie, that was your group. So as you're actually on my screen looking, I don't know whether you have anything from that group that you want to raise. You might not have, and that's fine.
Like Jamie's group, we didn't actually answer the question, but they looked at other people's comments and started to discuss them. I think I picked up most of the things. I'll use this opportunity just to a reflection that I'm having mentally at the moment, is that we in institutions have this representation system where we have somebody elected by a cohort to represent other students. Can that really work? Can one individual represent a very diverse group of students? Why are we wedded to the standard representation hierarchical system? We have digital communication methods now, which mean that we could step away from that and hear all voices equally. And I would advocate getting rid of student reps.
That's an interesting point, isn't it? A bit controversial there, Jackie. I don't know, what do other people think about getting rid of student reps?
I do like the point of whether the representative is representative of the people they're representing. You know, I think that is a very interesting, because it is putting somebody in a position of power because they have the influence and they're able to attend meetings and put forward the voice of students. But we were talking about this before. Just because there's one voice from students doesn't necessarily mean that's representative of their whole group. I do think there's lots to be said, though, about that role and about how that can develop certain people. But I also think that it can be problematic as well. But I do like the radical nature of doing away with a certain thing.
And I think also, if you're going to set a student up as a representative, you have to give them the mechanism through which they can enact representation. You know, so to what extent do we facilitate their representative role and enable them to take that on? You know, that's assuming that they want to take it on. And I recognise that, you know, I've worked with reps who don't represent other students, and I've worked with reps who will go out their way to represent their even to the point when you know that they're raising issues they don't necessarily hold themselves because they're working in that way. But I think in terms, Jackie, of the point you're making, one of the things I think we don't do, and it's been raised on the Padlet, is I don't think we're always very good at triangulating data. So we'll get data from one element of student voice and run with that. And then, you know, it's a bit like, you know, a student rep could say, I love this module. And you go, well, this is a great module. And then you look at the module evaluation data and it's really poor or whatever. And I think we need to do a much better job of bringing together those very democratic forms of engagement that everyone can engage in because it's easy and straightforward. And, you know, 70% of our students have filled in the National Student Survey or there and thereabouts. I know it's problematic, but that's an awful lot of information on student views. Whereas, you know, across the institution, we might have sort of 500 reps. So I think it's about bringing those different data sources together. I'm going to behave myself now and say Sarah's hand went up first because I've looked at the list. So Sarah, and then Kerry. Thanks.
Lovely.
So I think you may have just said what I was going to say there. I think we need to look at different methods and not just saying this is the way we're going to engage the students. But when we're talking about the student reps, we talked about survey fatigue in that, you know, there are surveys on everything, and that the response rate is quite low. But then Hannah, who works as a student liaison, she was saying that her engagement is quite strong because they do short little daily polls. And I think if we can make it not so much of a arduous task for the students, we may well get quick engagement, because, you know, let's face it, in the world today, things come at us quickly, and if we can't respond within a couple of minutes, we're like, no, I'm too busy for that. Whereas if it's just short and sharp, we may get more engagement.
Yeah, thanks for that. We trialed pulse surveys in lockdown. We didn't get terribly great engagement with it, but we got some really interesting data just by asking students key questions and just looking at how they were responding. I mean, about 600 students doesn't sound a lot, but it's still a lot of students. It's just after 27,000. It isn't a representative lot of students, but doesn't mean their data is any less valuable. Kerry.
Yeah, I just had a question for Jackie and a comment about the getting rid of the reps. I was just wondering, how do you collate your student voice then?
I would advocate that we use different methods. I mean, that we could use surveys, sort of polling surveys. You'd hear from all students. We have the technology to be able to personalize communications. We have the technology to be able to collate that information. It does mean it goes to everybody. We could communicate with every student quite quickly and rapidly with the technology we have and get feedbacks from all students.
Okay, thank you. So we've got 4 minutes left. I'm aware that there's a couple of groups that haven't had a chance to feedback, but I'm also aware that people probably want to finish on time. So what I'm going to do is invite out to group 3 and 5 if they've got any comments that they want to raise, and then we've got 4 minutes or so there and thereabouts to discuss those. So anyone from group 5, which was Claire Ashdown's group, or group 3, and I think Helena, you were in group 3, weren't you? So any ideas from those groups?
Something that did come up was Helen was asking a question about international students, and I said that one of our SEOs a few years back actually did a project on international students, and that just led me to think that, I mean, in education we're called SEOs, and then in English we're called something else, and then in business we're called something else, but we're all doing the same role. So why can't all the SEOs get together at some point and share all of this data? So when another faculty wants to look into something like Helen does, we already have it there and it can be added to. I don't know what Wendy thinks of that.
Too much silo working. Agreed. I've put a proposal to that effect forward, I must admit. There you go, Kerry. You're on the money.
Because we were talking about, weren't we, sometimes it's an individual that kind of sees the need, and in this case it was somebody that works one-to-one with our international students and just can see that there's a gap, you know, just in terms of their experience when they first come, the very kind of, you know, small stuff, the kind of, you know, things that would really improve their you know, their sort of transition here. And he's kind of really motivated to do this work, so he's speaking to, you know, all the different information points where students kind of land and kind of trying to pull that together. So it's that, like you say, it's often that kind of individual that sees that need, and it's, you know, but it would be really great to see if there is best practice, or, you know, findings that have been flagged up from previous engagement. That would be great before they start to think about how they engage with their students as well. You know, it's that kind of bit of best practice and a bit of kind of where are we up to with it kind of thing. And because it'll obviously probably need, you know, things move on, don't they? But yeah, it'd be great to see what's been done in the field. But I wasn't aware of any of this work at all. I work in professional services, didn't know that, you know, had been done. So that'd be great.
Helena came up with a good point about policy change. Do you want to comment on that, Helena?
in relation to
I think you said something
the
about
first
the
question.
forms. Yeah, the first one.
Yeah, I think there was two parts to the first question. If it was, I don't know if it was just me that saw it differently, but I think it was about drive and inspire, change and whatnot. And for me, I saw them very differently in relation to partnership working, and I saw the staff to student partnerships, and I'm just using, you know, my example here to draw on. I feel as though that inspired a change, but in terms of what drove the change, I feel as though it wasn't necessarily that. I think that gave it the momentum, that gave it the insight, and that gave it the visibility, I suppose. But did it provide the actual vehicle that created that change? No, I think it was the connections that were made as a result of that partnership work that created it. So I think there's just something to be said about language and what processes are required or needed along the way to create that change or to create them environments. So that was, I think that's what you meant, Kerry. Was it? I hope so.
Yeah, that was it. That the fact that you'd saw it as two different avenues. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I can see Jackie is getting off. I'm aware of the time. I think that was a really interesting discussion. Thanks very much. We have recorded this. I'm going to stop the recording now, though.